Welcome, everyone. My name's Annette Beck, and I work for the University of Iowa, and I'm the Director of Enterprise Instructional Technology. So my team not only takes care of the LMS, we take care of about 16 other services, lecture capture, clickers, etc. So as somebody adjusted that, and my mouse isn't working, so I'll use this. So as Ryan said, today we're going to talk about our transition. All three schools were previously, I can mention this, we were all three self-hosted D2L schools, and within the last year and a half, we have all three either started or finished our adoption of Canvas. So we work together a lot, and today our goal is to talk about the different kind of planning that each school did. So we've got 5 different presenters after me, and you're going to be hearing different categories. I also want to mention we have handouts at the back of the room for when you leave. We're going to cover a lot of content in a little bit of time. So we put all of our notes, not just from the slides, but all of our notes in a 15-page handout with our names on it. So if you have questions, you can contact any one of our schools or any one of us individuals. Part of the reason that we moved to Canvas is because it's awesome. But another reason that we moved to Canvas, or we were urged to move to Canvas, is all 3 schools are members of Unison. How many of you have heard of Unison in here? So quite a few. Unison is a consortium. It's about 4 years old. There are, right now, I think they just added some, so it's around 27 schools. There are 8 Big Ten schools, the Florida system, Colorado State, and Oregon State. So all large R1 institutions. And the goals of Unison are to bring together ideas, so not necessarily tools, but bring together ideas to make the learning ecosystem a better place for our faculty and our students. So yes, an LMS is an LMS, and Canvas does a really good job by their openness to bring in other tools, and that's really important, and that's why we partnered with Canvas at Unison. The other goals for Unison are a high focus on content sharing, not just with the Unison schools, that is a focus, but also outside Unison schools. So we're working deeply on some tools with OER and content sharing capabilities. And then the biggest one is probably the learning analytics piece. So we know that Canvas and other LMSs have some learning analytics in them. Canvas Data is awesome. And we're continually, as a consortium, pushing Canvas to put more data fields available for our schools. So learning analytics is huge. And from the Unison Consortium, one of the things we're thinking about doing is not just giving learning analytics to our individual schools, but de-identifying data so that we have a bigger data set to compare. So for instance, Chemistry 101, we could look at de-identified data from all of the schools and have a more informed vision of how our students are succeeding. So your takeaways today. As I said, there's a 15-page handout at the back of the room. There will be 5 different presenters. I will be coming back in a little bit to present on one of these topics. We're talking about our planning, our migration planning, impact on infrastructure and development processes, engagement, communication, and support. How did we handle these things? And then what are our lessons learned? All of the information that we're going to talk about today is in that handout. So I will have every person introduce themselves as they come up and present. We have 5 presenters. 1 person was unable to make it. And now I'm going to pass it off to Andy.
Thanks very much. So I'm Andy Goldstein. I'm an assistant director for learning solutions at UW-Madison. I lead the groups of technologists that were largely responsible for implementing Canvas as we brought it to UW-Madison. So a couple of things. As our campuses were exploring, assessing, and ultimately making the decision to move to Canvas, engaging with a broad spectrum of stakeholders was vitally important for us. So what did that mean for us? Well, we had to do formal presentations for campus leaders. And this was really important because while some of the impetus for moving to Canvas was coming from leaders at the highest levels on campus, we needed to get everybody kind of on board with us in this process. And that meant not only our provosts and vice provosts, deans, associate deans, leadership within the schools and colleges. We all have different makeups of our institutions, of course, but this kind of held true irrespective of how we're organized. A lot of us elected to do a sort of a roadshow style approach, where we created events where people could get some hands-on and eyeballs on Canvas to start previewing for them what was going to be different, what was going to be the same, and maybe where some of the challenges and opportunities might be for them. And we established and engaged with some advisory groups of instructional technologists. For some of this was sort of a new area for us, where we tried to get these people together, get them on board with us early, and create a channel for input, so that we could make sure as the transition went along, we were actually receiving their feedback and they were invested in it. One of the chief challenges our institutions faced when was balancing the continuity of operations for the legacy LMS environment while providing quality support for the transition to the new environment. So as you might imagine, again, as Annette mentioned, we were all on-premise, desire-to-learn institutions. And so we had a lot of apparatus, very elaborate infrastructure. Some of us still have that infrastructure in place to support it. We needed to make sure that those instructors and students and instructional technologists who were interacting with the legacy environment still were able to get what they needed done while we were starting to do the transition. So that meant that we needed to temporarily realign some staff, in some cases bring on additional temporary staff. We also had to seize the opportunity to really examine the support structures that we had in place. And in some cases that meant that we're running in a dual mode, that we support the legacy environment slightly differently than we'll support the new environment. And that's okay. I think as long as we are clear in how we communicate and set those expectations for campus. And then we needed to align software development and systems integration professionals to develop and support the integration and automations that were going to be needed. A rule of thumb for all of our institutions was that we work from was that it's not possible to over-communicate about a change as big as the transition from one LMS to another. As such, we tried to broadcast this across a variety of channels. So we had a website, generally a project-specific website that not only gave information about what to expect, but also was a conduit for information about progress all along. We targeted emails to stakeholder groups. Again, as you guys know, sometimes the email is the magic bullet for people, sometimes the website is the magic bullet. In some ways, we're being pretty redundant with this information, but we need to try and reach as many people as possible. We need to circle back with those leaders that I talked about at the beginning, where we need to make sure that they understand how we're doing, what the plan is, what some of the challenges might be, and how they can be helpful in helping us move. And then there's an ongoing engagement with those instructional technologists once again. Again, the real effort here is to get them to be part of the process rather than simply something that this is happening to and that they're a victim of. While the decision-making process at each of our institutions is obviously pretty unique, some core commonalities exist. So in many cases, in all cases, we had advisory groups, we had folks folks from campus who were providing input through governance structures. We obviously were getting a lot of input from our CIOs and our provosts and our vice provosts. Faculty governance committees weighed in as well. This was pretty important for us, especially at UW-Madison, but this is true across all of our institutions. Vice provosts for teaching and learning championed this transition. I can't underscore this one enough because, again, the reasons for moving to Canvas are myriad, and some will resonate with some people very well and others with others. So as a technologist, the reasons for a compelling move to Canvas for me are not going to resonate with an instructor. And having people at a leadership level being able to help sort of champion this across the entire institution is very helpful. And our provost and CIO ultimately made the decision. So we also did pilots, and this is a place of probably the most variance between our institutions. They really ran the gamut from very small targeted pilots of a handful of courses to very large pilots. And I think that this is one of those things that really is influenced most by the political and cultural climate at the institution. And so there's no rule of thumb there about how to craft the pilot. But there are some takeaways we had about the pilots. Taking the cost and effort of integration and automation up front in the pilot, even if it's a small pilot, will reap big dividends for you down the road. Because when the time comes to implement, if you're both implementing this across campus and getting people on board and, oh, by the way, implementing your automation with your SIS systems or what have you, it's really going to make that a bigger challenge. Ensure representation from multiple broad disciplines. And this can be a challenge sometimes. A lot of disciplines don't really feel like they have a strong stake in this one way or another. The bigger challenge we often found is some disciplines really feel they need to overrepresent in this. And we need to set clear goals for the pilots. Really figure out what you're going to look at and what you hope to achieve, and then be really transparent getting that information back to campus. So I'm going to pass it along to Valerie.
Hello, I'm Valerie Rake. I am Associate Director for E-Learning Support at The Ohio State University. I manage the team that is training, support, and app admin, and I work closely with our infrastructure and development teams. For our Canvas transition, I was the one of two project managers. What I'm talking about here are the structures that we developed to help our faculty make this transition. And I've grouped them in terms of the questions that came up and how our three schools responded. One of the things helping this transition was how much we relied upon peer groups and other community resources. A lot of commonality across here. Unison was an important resource, especially for helping us identify the gaps, if you will, between D2L and Canvas, and helping us try to get those into the development model. But the Unison group, the Canvas R1 Peers group, which is large schools and other sort of benchmarking institutions, were really very useful in helping us identify things to be aware of, things to plan for, good strategies. For us, the community was also a very valuable resource. It's something we really didn't have with D2L, and the Canvas community was a very useful place to say, all right, here's what people are telling us. What else are people doing to solve this problem? So that peer support was useful in this migration planning. The next question to deal with was actually data retention and whether or not we would move course content and student content from one LMS to the other. This is a place where we actually had different user experiences depending on what the expectations were. What is your actual campus policy on data retention? That's how you need to figure that out. Even more though, what do your faculty expect is the policy? Because your security folks might say 2 terms, but your faculty say infinite. So you got to figure out how to work that. Also, this one has got so many typos on it. What is the faculty experience in terms of data retention? The other thing to bring up is what should faculty expect for a migrated course? If you just export and import, what are they going to get? And that helped for Ohio State, that's why we didn't migrate, because we needed them to say, oh, I might need to redesign my course in order to take best advantage of the system. But again, this is a place where I think looking at your campus culture is an important part of your migration strategy. Handouts and resources, what were prepared. As was mentioned, multiple websites and stuff. In particular, what was useful was helping faculty identify the comparison between, in D2L, I had this, in Canvas, it's called that, and here's how it's the same, and here's how it's different. Because you know the LMS that you're moving from, you know where the pain points are going to be. And that was a useful thing to provide for faculty, was that sort of customized map. And that was also a thing, as a group of peers, we were able to share because we were coming from the same LMS. Again, mostly these were web-based resources, but we did do some high-level, one-page, let me take it with me out of the roadshow handouts that I think were mostly a comfort item, if nothing else. I have something to take with me, which helps. The next question was, how do we manage multiple systems? How do students figure out where their courses are? As it happens, Iowa and UW-Madison already had multiple systems. This was a new thing for Ohio State, but the solution was common, and that's a single landing page. Whatever your LMS is, students go to that place, and then there are mechanisms on that place for students to be able to find their courses without having to know. And that was a useful strategy for all of us. That landing page also provides a common place for additional functionality, for announcements, for other things that people need to know as part of the transition. Okay. Support desk. Do we use Instructure or do we keep local? This was, again, a place where we had a lot of differences, but the question is, what's going to help your end users and your local staff gear up most effectively with the least disruptions? Finally, the other question is, who decides when any particular instructor needs to start using Canvas? And this is, again, a place where there were some significant differences across our three institutions. I'm not going to go into the great detail, but it, again, had a lot to do with campus culture, campus structures, what was already in place to help this, and what the relationships were. Everywhere from, yes, we'll move it as this is your semester to move, to choose your own course, were the things that we saw happening across our institutions. And now, I believe it's Annette again.
Okay, so I'm back. So hello, I'm Dave Long from the University of Iowa. I'm the IT manager and LMS lead for Canvas and many other services. So I'm actually not Dave Long, as you probably figured out by now. Dave had a family emergency and couldn't join us, so I'm going to attempt to do his part of this slideshow. But remember, I see a lot of you taking photos of the slides. Remember, everything is in the handout, so if you want to save your images, your storage. So Dave is going to handle the infrastructure development processes. As we said earlier, all three schools were self-hosted, and we had to figure out how we were going to be a self-hosted school and go to the cloud. That was really scary for a little bit, because we had total control, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So we not only were making a vendor change, we were also moving from self-hosted to the cloud. Most of our users didn't really care about that. We had a few that cared. But most people really didn't care. They're just like, how do I learn this and what do I do next? So that was a challenge. A couple of the benefits moving to the cloud, we were able to take our server support folks and rearrange their duties to other things. And so, Canvas Instructure takes care of all the updates to the servers and the databases and all that. And that was an advantage, but it was also a little bit of a disadvantage because we lost control of what we could do for some of the logs, and we didn't have access to everything that we did as a self-hosted customer. So, there's pluses and minuses, and again, you have to look at your campus culture and decide what's best for your not just your IT support staff, but your campus as a whole. Change management. This is one of the hardest things we had to do, I think, for all three schools. Change is hard. One of the schools used ITIL pretty strongly for project management and change management solution. Sometimes you just got to go by the seat of your pants. And I think even though we had things in place for change management, there are things we maybe didn't anticipate. So you just have to be able to have your staff and prepare your staff to be able to change on the fly, and then you're going to be more successful. So the 3-week release cycle was really new for all of us. Our previous LMS would do 1, maybe 2 big upgrades a year, and because we were self-hosted, we could decide when we wanted to do it. We don't really have a choice on some of the things with Instructure, which has actually turned out to be pretty good, but we had to figure that out as we went. You know, how are we going to handle this? Do we have to dedicate a staff member to look at the beta releases and production releases, and how do we get that information to faculty? We're still working on that, but this is an example of how one of us is working through that. We've got very specific dates. We've got a specific person who kind of does a once-over, and then we might pull in some other staff as needed. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, mostly because I can't see the slides up here. Custom development, all of us have done custom development. Because we were self-hosted, we had the option to do a lot of custom development. Much of that had to be redone from scratch or changed. Luckily, we all have developers that are very talented on our team. UW-Madison, for instance, created focus groups to talk a little bit more detail about this. Iowa created some new tools to accommodate some of the little reports that were missing in D2L. So for instance, some of the grade reports are not in Canvas. Hopefully that will be coming. So we had to quickly custom develop some tools so that our faculty were kept at bay a little bit more, and they made the transition easier for them. SIS Integrations, obviously we had to work on all that. I will say, selfishly, for Iowa, Canvas is much better at opening integrations with third-party vendors, and that was a huge benefit for the University of Iowa. We had some tools we were trying to get integrated. Canvas already had it ready for us, so that was a huge advantage. There was some JavaScript and CSS and some API stuff that had to be redone. Again, we all have dedicated developers who can work on that stuff for us, but we did have to think about that in our timeline. You know, how much time is this going to take? How much staff time? What's not going to get done because we had to do this stuff? So that was all part of our planning. Again, we used this for some branding, to hide things, and some of these features were in D2L and don't exist in Canvas today. So now I'm going to pass it off to Kristy.
Thank you. Oh, this is loud. Hi, I'm Kristy Bergeron. I'm with UW-Madison, and I'm currently leading the operational team that supports our learning technologies at Madison. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the commonalities in support, training, and communication that we experienced. So first of all, we all offered one-on-one consultations, so high touch, that the faculty requested if they had more complex courses to migrate, and that seemed to work out pretty well. We also offered office hours and kind of walk-in sessions and things like that, and I think the sentiment was there were mixed results with that sort of approach. You know, it's always kind of risky. You're dedicating staff to kind of sit there and wait for people to come, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Another thing to think about when you're thinking about support is leveraging Instructure's awesome, vast community site for your documentation, your end user documentation. One of the principles of our adoption was do not recreate anything that already exists, because we lived through that with our previous LMS where we were constantly updating information, and that's just a lot of time and effort on the part of the operation team that you need to manage. So, is everything okay? Oh, And then, let's see, Andy mentioned this earlier, but we had sort of a hybrid model of support. So our central academic technology unit reached out to the distributed schools and colleges to see what they could offer in terms of some of that support work, like the walk-in sessions and the documentation. And it's going to vary based on the department. So we had, for instance, the School of Business was gangbusters. They were like, we're ready to go. We're taking care of our staff. They come to you. You send them to us. Done. Like, awesome. And then we had some other departments, schools and colleges who, maybe didn't have that kind of staff to be able to help us much, or just wanted to rely on that central academic technology support. So, I'd recommend you meeting with those groups early and often to try and determine, what level of involvement they want to have, and then work from there. And then Annette talked about, I think Valerie talked about this a little bit, but the help desk experience, it varied a little bit for our institutions, so I think Ohio and Iowa opted to use their institutional help desks, so they're tier 1. That's, I call you help desk if I have problems. At Madison, I will just speak to our rationale for using Instructure. So we had kind of a fast and furious adoption, at the beginning, and frankly, our, internal staff felt more comfortable just relying on Instructure for that initial support for that first year. That was just kind of one less thing we had to worry about. And they came in and provided that level 1 support for that first year. There's a cost, obviously, for that. But we just finished transitioning over to our internal institutional help desk. And, that was a really nice, smooth transition. And our rationale was we got great support from Instructure from their tier 1, so awesome. But, for the rest of our instructional technologies, we send people to our, institutional help desk. So really we were getting messages from people that they wanted that consistent experience. I want to go to one place for help, and I want to get that consistent experience. Okay, so support, training, and communication. Face-to-face workshops and sessions were offered. So let's see, it was Iowa. I think you guys did like 230 sessions all told through the course of your transition. So plan to invest a lot of work in that. Madison, we're about 60% through our migration, and I think we've offered 70-ish in-person sessions. The feedback that we've gotten at Madison, and I think I was saying this too, those are critical. People want to come in person and hear about the tool and see you guide them through using the tool. So it's a worthy investment. A lot of time, but I definitely recommend, make planning and devoting resources to that training effort. And not to leave out online courses. So, some people prefer just-in-time, self-paced training, and you certainly want to think about those people as well. So our institutions provided online training. At Madison, I can speak to the fact that we put a pretty robust online training course in our Canvas instance. We also put a smaller course in there for students as well. So when students log in, they'll see a course, and it's just a few slides kind of introducing them to Canvas. So it's not necessarily a training, but just some information that we put in there for students. And one important thing I want to talk about too is just thinking in terms of training, thinking about everybody that might need training. So, we have training for instructors, but your sub-account administrators, you don't want to leave them out of your training scope too. So your sub-account administrators are the administrators that are responsible for managing the sub-accounts in Canvas. So often those are departments, schools, colleges, things like that. So we felt it was important to provide those folks with some training, and some of that included information about campus policy. So you might be able to change the name of your course in Canvas, but don't want to do that because the registrar's office would prefer you don't. Also FERPA, you have access to all this wonderful data. You need to know that there's power in that and what to do and what not to do. So at Madison, we actually deployed an online course for those sub-account administrators. When they request access to be an admin, we enroll them in that course. They must complete it. Then we provision access. And then on an ongoing basis, we'll make them retake the training because lots of things are going to change throughout the course of a year. And so we want them to be prepared to do what we're expecting them to do. So because they are providing, a lot of benefit for us and, the central administration department as well. And then communication, we just have a list of tactics here. I won't go over them a lot in detail, but a couple of things I just want to call out. So again, you can't communicate too much, so we have a lot of regular communication with our valuable sub-account admins and our valuable distributed instructional technologies and partners from schools and colleges and departments. So, a lot of that communication, it's never wrong to over-communicate, right? So a lot of it is just emails, hey, this new feature's coming on Canvas, you probably want to be aware of this. Or, hey, there's a problem with this. Kind of really urgent communication is that email. But then we also feel it's important to kind of get together with those people on a regular basis, like monthly meetings and things like that, and kind of network. So yeah, I'll get off the stage before they bring the hook out. And hand it off to Travis.
Hi, I'm Travis Ritter from Ohio State. I'm the Director of Learning Systems and Infrastructure. And I'm covering lessons learned. Most of this has been touched on. Andy talked about, did I go back? Yep. Andy talked about communication and how it's impossible to over-communicate. I'm going to touch on it again by way of example. So this is not the time for surgical precision. We had a comp plan with hundreds and hundreds of touch points, and we don't regret a single one of them. Tweets, articles, bus signs, meetings. There are a few we regret not doing. So even with everything we did, it was the most ambitious comp plan we ever undertook. But there were people who said that maybe we didn't engage with them enough. So one piece of advice is meet early with these groups, for instance, Faculty Senate, and figure out exactly how they want to be involved, and then do more. Let's see. Identify your themes and keep messages positive. Canvas does a lot of great work. Faculty and students, we found, prefer it. Hammer at those themes. Take credit for Canvas. You're the face of Canvas. Quizzes.next, that was me. So build momentum. Create that word of mouth, build momentum through pilots and everything, and keep it going. We had much higher adoption rates than we thought we would. And part of it may be because we continued straight from the pilot to production, and we did things like send groups to InstructureCon, which built a community. We really leveraged our IT groups and our peers across the university. Let's see. And all of this can be repurposed once you're done for communication around updates, because Canvas changes really fast. So I think that was one of the things we all kind of came to realize. There's a lot more communication now that we have to do regularly. So breathe. That's really important. Wisconsin and OSU, I know, were rolling out other tools at the same time. I don't know about Iowa. Yeah, that was really hard. And we would fight like hell to avoid doing that again. Clear your slate if you possibly can. It's really stressful for staff sometimes. We had, at OSU, we had a couple of health issues, maybe not directly related to the Canvas adoption, but I'm sure it didn't help. Because it was a really stressful time for everybody. So make people take vacation, create space, watch people's hours. I think we all work with really dedicated people. Don't let them get down in the hole too far. And always look for work you don't have to do. We surveyed people about what support techniques were working, what communication techniques were working. On our campus, we cut out in-person office hours after a while because it just wasn't giving enough results. Plan. So I think we all found that the sooner you can plan your work and share it, the more stable everything was, the less susceptible to change, the more buy-in we got, and the more coherent communications we could do around it. So, for example, your schedule. How long is the transition going to take? Communicate about that, lock it in. We had some back and forth. We said we wanted 2 years. Our CIO said you could do it in a term. we leveraged our peer network to sort of, do a sanity check. Is that a good idea? So we got to a year, which I think was what our CIO had intended anyway. I lost my place. So, questions like, what are you going to do with old course content and student data? Are you going to help, to what extent are you going to help faculty move their content into Canvas? Are you going to purchase 24/7 support? We covered these things, but I want to emphasize that you have to decide these things at the beginning, and then you have to communicate that out consistently throughout the entire project so people know and they can prepare. Did you tell the deans that faculty in their area are going to have to migrate everything on their own, or that you were going to provide an archiving service? That all bears fruit when you get down to the end. And front load your work, that was covered. The integrations, if you can do them during the pilot, as much as you can do ahead of time. Treat it like you're starting your actual migration early. Dedicate the resources as if you were in the middle of the migration, and get all that stuff out of the way. Effective project managers are a gift, by the way. Don't just assume that somebody can take on that role in addition to their other duties. Be responsive. I want to leave time for questions, so I'm going to skip some of this, but prepare for disaster, form your relationships ahead of time, keep a finger on the pulse, have advisory groups, touch in regularly with your faculty, with students, have a plan for dealing with LTI integrations, and so after you do the transition, gosh, we thought we were really disappointed in our old LMS for not having enough third-party integrations, but we don't have that problem now. So we had to actually change our vetting process. We had to be much more responsive for updates, for LTI integration requests. Peers are great. We all benefited from Unison. We had sanity check calls every month. We all did interviews with people who had gone before us, and I think any of us would be happy to get on a phone call with any of you and pay it forward if we can. So that's about it, and I guess we'll open it up for questions.
Hi, my question is real quick. I saw an issue with access to China. What problems did you have, and how did you get around those?
Access to China, is that?
So that is an issue. That's a real issue. We actually have had that issue, in our Division of Continuing Education particularly. They recruit a lot of Chinese students. Right now, there is no solution. So we've actually had to refund some Chinese students their tuition based on that. So hopefully Instructure is working on that one, because that is impacting our institution. Don't forget the handouts when you leave, by the way.
Would you do it again if you had the opportunity?
Yes. Yeah. Iowa would do that. I'm going to let these guys talk, but the only thing I would do differently that I didn't do is there's one college, our liberal arts and sciences, which is fairly large. I would have split them in 2 semesters as opposed to letting them go in one.
I think Wisconsin certainly would do it again for a variety of reasons, including the relationship with the previous vendor. Certainly there were a lot of things we would have done differently as part of the process, but overall this decision in the long run is going to be a big positive for the institution.
Yeah, I think we have even more evidence now that faculty and students really like this product a lot better, and that it's a better service, so we would definitely do it again.
I want to add something to that in the sense that we really took advantage of the move to a new LMS to encourage faculty to rethink their courses. That was one of the reasons we didn't migrate for them. It's like, hey, it's been a while. Take a look. And for pedagogical reasons, that was kind of nice. I don't think people liked me, but I think it was good.
And people didn't like me, but we actually migrated 2 years. But we did have those conversations when we did those 230 training or whatever, the instances where we help people. We did encourage them to take a choice. If you're thinking about redoing your course, now's a really good time to do that. Otherwise, we'll migrate as is. Here are the issues you know you're going to face.
So I'm curious if you guys have done any work post-transition on how the total cost of ownership has changed kind of in the D2L instance versus Canvas today.
So we do have that in writing. I don't know that we would share it unless our Board of Regents let us. For us, it was pretty much a wash because with D2L, we were self-hosted. We had all the infrastructure, we had server support staff, and many other things attached to that. So for us, the cost of it either saved us money or it was a wash.
And I'd echo that. I'd further say that what this alludes to something that Travis said during his wrap-up. There's a whole bunch of new opportunity that the Canvas LMS brings to us. And as a result, savings that I think maybe some of our campus leaders thought we were going to have has actually been invested in this opportunity. So it's a wash at the moment. I think in the long run, it's going to be a cost savings for us. I like the idea of getting out of being in the big iron business, and I think that's something that the whole institution get behind.
Yeah, I'd say, we still have to support some servers for our integration and everything, but as we move that stuff to the cloud, ultimately we'll see more savings. Right now we're paying a little bit more, but ultimately I think it'll be a wash.
I think we got time for one more question
We
right here.
at Iowa are also building an archive system, so all 13 years of our D2L data will be accessible with view only to all of our faculty.
That answered, I think, my question that I was going to have. So we're transitioning, we're a big D2L campus, and we are on-prem, transitioning. I think this is our last semester. We're looking at sunsetting D2L. So data retention, did you still keep all that stuff?
So at Iowa,
Can you get it back?
So at Iowa, answered it my most awesome developer sitting in the front.
Oh,
and he's
awesome.
Actually,
okay, we need to
he's
talk.
actually building an archive system for us to do, with the ultimate result of using that as a Canvas archive as well. So we'll be able to retain data. I'm not sure I agree with the philosophy of our institution of keeping everything, but that's what I was doing.
And I'm going to give this to him because this is an ongoing conversation between the two of us. We tried to emphasize this is the institution's data policy. You're not obligated to keep everything. Again, this is a campus culture thing. What is the policy? But we know that colleges and departments did some work in terms of data retention. So, again, it's what does your institution need? But Travis has other things.
Yeah, that goes to my point about communicating early about what you're able to do for people. We realized early on we weren't going to be able to archive everything. So we did a series of articles about here's your responsibilities, here's how to do things securely. We talked to each college about, how can you help people, especially adjuncts or people who are on sabbatical, who are going to maybe have a surprise? How can you help them with their data? But we mostly just handled it with communications and policy. So, yeah, when August 31st comes, we will be shutting down D2L.
That's our hope as well, but I would say in the list of things that we wish we would have done differently, I think we would have started dealing with the archival issue well upstream. At Wisconsin, we're dealing with it now, and it's going to be a pretty painful process of aligning policy to what we are technically capable of doing. So in our case, our contract will overlap over the full 2 years of our transition, and then a very abrupt end. Yeah.
Ours is the same, 2 years.
Yeah, we're pretty much next month, we're done.
We're done at the end of the year in December, but we were actually done with our migration after 2 semesters. So fall and summer and fall last summer, we migrated everyone in 2 semesters. So that gave us almost a full year for us to build the archive system and have faculty sort of on the side and out of the way.
That's part of how the decision was made is we don't have time to build an archive system. And since we're not obligated to keep it archived, don't do that work. No, this is an ongoing conversation between us.
So we'll stay for a little bit. I know we're in between you and lunch. So if anybody has specific questions, we'll stay for a little bit. So thank you.